staying for dinner? You know, my mama didn't raise no fool. There's only one answer to that question. Heck yeah. I was deeply struck by the spiritual community of the Catholic worker, and I kind of got some of the stories of the folks around the table. One family had recently moved from Mexico. Father was working in the fields. The Catholic worker house was where that family stayed until they could put together enough money for a down payment on an apartment. There were a couple of people who were doing PhDs at the University of Illinois, studying social justice issues, decided that they would rather live those social justice issues than finish those PhDs, and they had come to the Catholic worker house to live out the Catholic faith. The longer I was there, the longer I had an answer to my Coetzee question, which is, we all come into the world with the memory of justice. Where does that memory come from? Well, Catholic workers were really the first people, since my growing up years with my mother, who was a pretty religious woman, who used one three-letter word unabashedly. That was God. Why do you do this? Because of God. Because God calls us to serve people in this way. And we have a decision to make. Do we follow that call or don't? You're not heroes if you do. You're not traitors if you don't. But God calls us to work in this way. We answer the call. It's that simple. And it really did feel that simple to me. And it really did feel that powerful, that elegant. And I decided this is the space that I want to spend my time in. The space that I think of as connecting the heavens of grace with the problem of life. And I spent the next summer traveling through Catholic worker houses from Atlanta to Boston. And that experience shaped me for the rest of my life. I was 18 years old, and I showed up at the Dorothy Day House in Washington, D.C., 9 o'clock at night, and said, my friend and I are traveling through Catholic worker houses. Sorry that we didn't call ahead. Can we stay here? And the person looked back and said, I think Art went to jail today. So, sure, there's a free bed. I'm like, I don't think I've ever really heard that line. Turned out that Art had done a protest at the Pentagon as part of his Catholic teaching on social justice and peace. Wound up in Slammer for a couple weeks, which meant that we had a bed. So, the next morning, I was waken up early by one of the Catholic workers, and we were taken to one of the wholesale food distributors in the D.C. area, where we begged food for that night's soup kitchen. And the Catholic worker who was taking us around said, very simply, this is about what you do not immediately need belongs to those who go without. It's that simple. Right? Quoting straight from Dorothy Day. What you do not immediately need belongs to those who go without. It makes so much sense to me. Right? So here we are, and what was so beautiful for me was that there were folks who, there were these wholesale food merchants who had actually left aside some of their lettuces, some of what people famously call Catholic worker rise, some of their rice, some of their produce for these Catholic workers so that the soup kitchen could be filled. And then something pretty funny happened. The person we were with, we looked across the kind of warehouse, and there were a set of small women in habits walking around doing the same thing. And Alan looked at us and said, "Game is up. Sisters of Charity, they're going to get all the food." So the Catholic workers had to do was to arrive at the warehouse before the Sisters of Charity showed up. Otherwise, all the lettuce was going to go to their soup kitchen. But I remember asking at one of the Catholic worker houses that I went to, I was so taken by the work they were doing, particularly Vietnam veterans. Can I stay here with you next summer? This summer I traveled through all these houses. Next summer I just want to spend here with you. And the person looked at me and said, I've watched you for the past couple of days. And you close your eyes when we pray, and you nod your head when we sing. But you're not Catholic, are you? He said, no. He's like, you're not Christian, are you? I'm like, no. He's like, and you spend enough time with us to kind of go through a discernment process of, do you think you're going to become Catholic or Christian? And I said, yeah, I spent enough time with you guys that probably not going to become Catholic. And he said, well, I think that that's fine. But I have to be clear with you. We drink here from Catholic waters. But there are other waters. And if you are not going to be fully nourished from Catholic waters, I think you should find the water you are going to be fully nourished by. And it was a beautiful, beautiful gift for me. Because what he was saying was, he was very clear about who he was. He was very clear about what he drank from. He was very clear that the community he was building was based on that. That was his commitment. That was his living out what King would call being a son of the living Christ. But he was also deeply perceptive about my journey. And if my journey, if he thought it was going to cross into his path, I think he would have gladly invited me into it. But he didn't think it was going to do that. So he suggested I do something else. He said, look, we can still be brothers in this journey of justice. But if you want to connect heaven, the heavens of grace, and the Harlem of life, you need to find what path you have to the heavens of grace. And so I began a journey, a different kind of journey, a journey of reading. I found myself in high texts, and I found myself with Hindu texts. I read Heschel, and I read King, and I read widely across these faith traditions, and really, in many ways, bringing Catholic worker eyes to those different traditions, which is to say, seeking justice in those traditions. And for a good while, I thought that my place was going to be in the Buddhist fold. And actually, another mentor of mine, a Catholic brother named Wayne Teasdale, had a connection with His Holiness the Dalai Lama. And on a trip of mine to India, said to me, well, I think I can get you a brief audience with His Holiness. Why don't you go? Again, my mama didn't raise no fool. You take people up at that offer. And so all the way to India, where, it's fascinating, we're sent by a Catholic monk into largely Hindu India. I'm traveling with my best friend who's a Jewish poet to go see this Buddhist master. I'm practicing my meditation practice. Right? With my version of Buddhist meditation when I was 21 years old is you sit still and think about nothing. Which, I don't know if that's really, I don't know where I got that from, but anyway, there you go. So, I would fold my legs, I would get my arms just so, I would close my eyes, I would take 3 deep breaths, and my mind would be filled by a variety of jungle gyms and carnivals. And I'm like, I'm not that good at this thinking of nothing thing. So I would remove the jungle gyms and carnivals, and I would pause, and I would breathe, and I would try to think about nothing. They would all enter back in. And what struck me was they would enter in to the tune of a particular prayer. Ya Ali, Ya Muhammad. Ya Ali, Ya Muhammad. It's the mantra that my mother taught me when I was young. It's a Shia Muslim mantra. And I decided that I wasn't going to share this with anybody, but since I wasn't very good at reading it from my mind, I would just focus on Ya Ali, Ya Muhammad, and hopefully the Buddhist karmic ideas of emptiness would understand what I meant. This was my language of being a Buddhist. So Kevin and I have our 15 minutes with the Dalai Lama. And Kevin is wearing a chain with a cup on the end, a little cup. And His Holiness reaches over, touches the cup, and says, emptiness, I love it. And Kevin, who for some reason is not scared, as I am petrified, says to the Dalai Lama, the idea of emptiness in Buddhism brought me back to the idea of emptiness in Judaism. And Kevin tells the story of Ayin Sof, which is this kind of Jewish creation story, the idea that at one point the universe was all God. The entirety of the universe was the divine. And in order to create the world as we know it, God had to contract within Himself. And that contraction produces a shattering of light, and that light still exists in the world